There are a lot of great painting programs out there for digital painting. I tend to use Photoshop. It is the industry standard and it has all sorts of actions and programmable things you can do and the keyboard shortcuts that give it a very streamlined pipeline. If you need to produce a bunch of images quickly, efficiently, it's one of your absolutely best options. But Photoshop does like about 10 million things, and it can be really overwhelming. As a digital painter, you really only need it to do about 40 tops. And this video is about 10 tools, right? 9 keyboard shortcuts you should know, 10 tools you should have a whole good handle on, and if you've got that, anything else you add onto it is just fun gravy, little bonuses and tricks. But if you've got these 10 basic tools, you're set up to start painting and making digital art in Photoshop. Now, one thing is how the Photoshop program is set up, how the user interface is set up. It can be configured a bunch of different ways. I've got a separate video, a companion video here about setting Photoshop up the way I like it and the way you see it in the step-by-steps I'm going through. But that's a separate video. And then here we're just going to dive into these basic tools. 9 keyboard shortcuts you want to memorize. Most of them are pretty easy, like B for brush, E for eraser. It's going to go smooth, don't you worry. So before you can really use the tools, you need to have a file you can use them in. So the first thing we need to know is where the file drop-down menu is and how to find new, open, and save. So a new will let us create a new file. We can choose how many pixels it is and what resolution. We can save as to the cloud or on your computer. I always keep things on my computer and back them up on the cloud, but I keep them on the computer. You choose your file types and your names and that sort of stuff there. And open to get an existing piece of artwork that you want to play with. Your first key short is B. B for brush. B turns on your brush, and then if you use Shift B, it'll toggle you through the different brush types. There's your brush. There's your pencil, which removes all anti-aliasing and makes the pixels it hits just on or off. Not very useful very often. The color replacement tool, again, we don't use very often or ever. And then the mixer brush, which is a fun tool, but not the workhorse. The one that you mainly want is just the brush. Now, if you've got the brush activated, all you have to do is hold down the Alt key. Not just press it, but hold it down. So if I hold down the Alt key, I get a color picker, and I can choose that red, or that green, or this mix in between, or any other color that's already in my image. And then as soon as I let go of the Alt key, it just turns right back to my brush and lets me keep painting. To make the brush larger and smaller, you use the open and close bracket keys. Pressing the close bracket makes it bigger. And the open bracket makes it smaller. The two most important types of brushes are brushes where when you press harder, it draws darker, just like a pencil or charcoal or something like that. And then brushes where if you press harder, it draws bigger, like a calligraphy brush or crow quill that you dip in ink or a brush that you dip in ink. And to access those, if you want to modify it yourself, you go into the brush settings, which is this little window over here. And in shape dynamics, you set the size jitter to 0, and the control to pin pressure. Or if you wanted to get lighter and darker, you go to transfer, and you set the opacity jitter to 0 and the control to pin pressure. So if I take this brush here and I go in to my brush settings and shape dynamics, I set the size jitter to 0, control to pin pressure. If the minimum diameter is 100%, it doesn't do anything. If I take it all the way down to 0, then I can get these tiny lines or these big fat ones, depending on what I'm doing. Or if instead I go into transfer, opacity jitter to 0, control to pin pressure, I get the ability to draw lightly or darkly. And this is really pretty key to digital painting, is this control here. So to review, you've got B for brush, hold down Alt to select colors, and use the open and close brackets to make it bigger and smaller. Next keyboard shortcut we want to learn is E. E is for eraser. And pretty much all the controls that work on brushes, setting the pressure sensitivity so it makes it lighter and darker or bigger or smaller, using the brackets to resize, all that stuff works on erasers just the same. Okay, next is your fill tool. And fill is G, sadly, not F. So if I click G, and that fills my area with blue. Control Z to undo. If I have drawn a shape and I click G for my fill, it'll fill in parts of that shape that are the same color. And how picky it is about how similar the colors have to be is controlled up here in your tolerance. If you set your tolerance all the way up for 255, then it'll color everything. If you set your tolerance down to 1 or 0, it'll only color the pixels that are exactly the same color. The other button to play with is contiguous. If I have contiguous checked and I say fill this, that's what it does. If I have contiguous unchecked and I say fill this, it fills everything on the screen, that's everything in the file that's the same color. The other part of, just like you can do Shift B to toggle through brushes, you can do Shift G and get your gradient tool. Your gradient tool by default is set to go from your color to white, but I don't think that's anywhere near as useful as having it go from your color to transparent, because then we can start stacking these effects on top of each other. And there's straight line gradients, there's a radial gradient that goes out from the middle, there's other things, but really the ones that get used a ton are the straight line gradient, which just makes it go from your dark paint to transparent, left to right, or whatever direction you drew it in, and then your radial, which goes from the center out. And just like holding down Alt when you've got the brush gets your color picker, in your fill tool, holding down Alt gets you your color picker, and you can pick whatever color is on the screen and use it. Layers. Now layers is a key feature of image creation in Photoshop. It was first introduced in Photoshop 3 in 1994. So I've got my layers window down here in the bottom right where I keep it. If I don't have it there, I can go to Windows Layers to get it. And currently I just have one layer, but if I hit the little plus sign down here, I can get a new layer. And that layer I can draw on, and it doesn't affect what's below it. New layer again. Doesn't affect what's below it. If I do my transforms, Control T, it only affects what's on that layer. So new layer is the plus sign. Delete layer is the trash can. It'll ask you if you want to do it. Yes. And then the last thing to know, I'm making another new layer here. And I'm going to draw some random shapes here. So the last thing is layer mode. So right here, there's this little pull down menu. It's currently set to normal. We've got this like 12 different ways for Photoshop to decide what to do with the information on that layer and how it affects the lower layer below it. In normal, it just covers it up on top. The next most useful, there are 4 ones that I think are really useful. Normal, multiply, overlay, and screen. But there's a bunch in there. But those 4 are the kind of my workhorses for my process. When I'm goofing around and experimenting, I'll try other things, but usually those are my go-to guys. So if I've got my image that I'm working on and I want to do something that affects just a part of it, I want to copy it or move it or make it bigger or smaller or rotate it, and it's not already on its own layer, I need to know how to select just that part I want. So the first tool for that is M, the marquee, which lets us draw a rectangle, and then we can copy, paste, transform, anything, fill that. Let's do copy. Control C is copy, and then Control V is paste. And now you see over here I've got a new layer that is just that rectangle that I chose. If I do Shift M, that changes my rectangle into an oval. Shift M takes it back to a rectangle. If you want to select something that isn't just a rectangle or an oval, L for lasso is your tool of choice. That lets you draw the shape that you want to pick. If you do Shift L, you'll get a straight line option where you just click and it draws a straight line selection in between it. Copy, paste, boom. Or this little magnet one that I never use, and then back to the freehand. Now once you've got G to fill on a new layer, oops. Oh, G to fill, there we go. On a new layer, and now I've selected, made active this layer with this weird bird shape in it. If I hit Control T or Command T if you're Mac, then I get my transformation box, and I can make it bigger and smaller. If I hold down Shift, I can make it skinny or fat. If I click outside of it, I can rotate it. And then coolest of all, if I go up here, I get this little icon of this curvy box. And when I click that, I get the ability to stretch and distort, bend and warp my shape into whatever shape I need it to be. Click the checkbox to accept that, or hit enter. They both work the same. And you've got this new shape based on that old shape. It can be really useful for when you've drawn somebody's head too small and need to make it bigger, or drawn something straight up and down and you want it to lean and curve a little bit. To review, if you want to make marks, you want B for brush. If you want to fill things in, you want G, which doesn't stand for fill, but okay. If you want to erase things, E for eraser. Select things is M for your marquee tool, or L for your lasso tool. Once you've got that, you can Control T or Command T for your transform. And that should pretty much do it. You've got your 9 shortcuts. You've got your open and close and how to use layers. And that's really the meat and potatoes of drawing and painting in Photoshop. Once you've got that under your belt, the rest is just fun tricks and add-ons.